Google Hangouts.
Google Hangouts.
Oh, it's Talking Drupal time, 2015. Today's episode 81, January 14th, 2015. Today we're talking about Drupal 8 in 2016. This is our second take. We had a little Google Plus problem today, but welcome, guys.
Hey there.
This is the first. This is the first time. This is the first time any of us, I think, have spoken this year.
Yeah.
2 weeks into the year.
Show.
So how is everyone? And I guess we'll go in order. Welcome, Jason.
Hey there. Good to be back on something of a regular schedule. No.
Yeah, it's been crazy. The first 2 weeks of the year for me have been insane. Insane for all kinds of reasons, some good and some bad, but just a crazy start to 2015.
Yeah, I agree too. It's just different schedule of kids home from school and then going back to school and work stuff on top of that. We finished a big project at the end of last year, and we're like trying to ramp up on some new stuff now, and just a lot going on.
Yeah, same here. Glad to see you still sporting that beard. You made it through the holiday season with it. It looks good.
Thank you.
Which takes us to our next guest. We'll see how his is doing. I think you guys were starting those beards about the same time. Welcome, John.
Well, what's going on? Jason's looks a little bit more filled out than mine does, so I don't know. We'll have to get a closer look tonight at our local Drupal meetup.
Well, John, I see you've got those gray accents in there, which is cool.
Yeah, cool.
It's not quite as uniform,
cool.
So it looks good.
Cool's a good word for it.
All right. So how was your break, John? And how was your break from us? We haven't been together in three to 4 weeks now. So
my break was interesting. The day before my break, I got a pretty vicious sore throat, which carried right through the holiday, and didn't end until the Sunday before I had to go back to work. So my break was great, other than the fact that my throat felt like it was on fire.
And we can't move on to Nick without at least mentioning that our New England Patriots are now in the NFC. The AFC Championship on Sunday. So
they are.
We'll throw in a little sports here too.
Hopefully they play better than they did against the Ravens.
All you have to do is win.
It is true. Even if it's an ugly win, it's still a win.
Exactly.
But I'm looking forward to the Patriots and Katy Perry in the Super Bowl.
That's the motto of my life. It's a win, but it's an ugly win.
The Patriots and Katy Perry. Oh, I see.
Yeah, I'm not all with that Katy Perry thing. I'm not sure what's going on there, but okay. Maybe she's current. Is she current?
She's entertaining. I don't know about current.
I'm not sure she's current.
Well, it's pretty current, I think. Certainly more current than me.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure she's current. I don't know. I saw her interview last week during the game where she had her big announcement. And I think her announcement I'd rather see than her, but that's just me. So
Lenny Kravitz, I don't know.
Yeah, I'd rather see him any day. But she had so much makeup on. I was wondering what the face actually looked like underneath. We have really gone off the rails here. So let's bring it to
kind of looks like Jason.
Fresh in from Colombia. We have our Colombian import. Nick, welcome back.
How you doing? It's good to be back. It was,
like a fine coffee.
Is it good with the 11-degree temperature this morning?
We came in when it was -20 the next day, and we didn't realize it was going to be that cold, and we went out. And yeah, going from 70-degree weather to -20 is a bit of a shock. But it's good to be back. Good to be back working. Best vacation of my life. Family's fantastic down there. Food's fantastic. It was a good day. Speaking of a good month. Speaking of sports, we were actually at the bar the other day, and the Colts were playing Denver. Joanna said, "So, can you explain American football to me? I think I'd like to know what it's like." So I gave her the brief rundown of the rules, and we're watching it. And there's 5 minutes she says, okay, let's go. I'm like, no, there's only 5 minutes left in the first half. Let's finish it. She's like, okay, there's only 5 minutes left. Well, soccer, they never stop the clock, ever.
20
15
minutes
minutes,
later.
15 minutes later, she's like, only 2 minutes have gone by in the clock. Let's go. I'm like, no, I told you there's only 5 minutes left. And she had her first experience of football and how long it takes. But I don't think she's gonna take it up too much. But it was a good time. Vacation was great. Good to be back though.
Yeah, it's great to be back. So let's get into our show topic today. We have two things we're going to talk about. So first thing is going to be about Drupal 8. Second thing, just to let you know, is we had a listener reach out to us, as we've asked in the past, and say if you ever have any questions, reach out to us, and we'll try to answer them. So we're going to address Dan's question later in the show, probably the second half. The first half of the show is a discussion about Drupal 8, the constant topic. And this discussion comes from my attendance to the Boston Drupal meetup last week. I think it was last Tuesday night. And Moshe was there. And it was funny at the beginning of the meeting, at the Boston Drupal meetup, they always do a sort of everyone give an announcement of who you are, where you work for, what's your relationship with Drupal, that kind of thing. And there was a good attendance. There was over 40 people there, maybe even 50 that night. It was at Genuine Interactive in Boston. And people going around the room, and they asked to give your New Year's resolution. So I would say probably half the room was, I'm going to commit to learning Drupal 8. I'm going to do something with Drupal 8. I'm either going to learn it, I'm going to contribute to it in some way. So Drupal 8 was a hot topic right from the initial introduction. And the format of that meetup is basically there was a keynote sort of speech that was only about 15 minutes from Genuine, who was hosting the event. And then it's lightning talks. People get up for 5 or 7 minutes. And so Moshe got up, and his topic was, hey, here's what's going on with Drupal 8. And then the bomb was dropped in the room, which was his opinion was that, and I'm not sure that his opinion is some sort of official announcement. I don't think it is. I'm treating it like it is. But his announcement was he didn't believe that September DrupalCon in Barcelona would be. It's very optimistic that Drupal will have a full release. Drupal 8 will have a full release by that point. We're probably talking more about 12 months away. So we're probably looking at something like the first quarter of 2016. I don't believe I was the only person in the room that jaw hit the floor in terms of that timing. It seems so far away, yet it doesn't. And so I thought we'd take a few minutes in today's call to just at least talk about that a little bit, in what that means. And the thing to me is that I know that I've been ramping up mentally and things that I'm doing and things I'm trying to learn over the last 3 or 4 months about Drupal 8 to at least put it into my daily routine or weekly routine to learn something and get familiar with it and know what's going on, in preparation mentally that sometime probably mid to later part of 2015 the product would be released. And to hear that we're probably looking at 2016, and when I hear that date a year away, I'm almost thinking, Jesus, that could end up being the end of 2016. I immediately go to, if today I'm saying it's 12 months away, well, probably 8 months away I might be saying is 12 months away. So because I know how projects go.
So
Yeah.
so some stats
Yeah.
as far as it goes today. They revamped the Drupal 8 release page. I don't know if everybody's aware of that. So it has actually a chart of incoming issues versus outgoing issues, and then in really bold letters it tells you how many critical issues are left.
John, what's the URL to that when you say the release page?
The URL is Drupal.org.
Yeah.
Yep, Drupal.org/Drupal-8.0-get involved. And I'll be sure to put that in the show notes for everybody. But here it says there are 89 critical issues remaining. which seems like a large number to me because I think the end of last week there were right around 80, 81, 82 issues remaining. So somewhere we picked up eight pretty hefty issues. The other thing that is interesting, and I don't know how credible it is, but seems like they're using some sort of metrics to gauge this, is the DrupalReleaseDate.com, which I think Nick actually sent out.
Right.
They're saying that they estimate the release to be July 10th, 2017. So that's even further away than
yeah. Somebody
just a year.
A similar kind of thing with Drupal 7, and it definitely gave a somewhat more pessimistic view, and I don't think it took quite that long. But it's a lot. I mean, that's just looking at the trend and how long it's taken to close things out.
Is anyone concerned? Like, I kind of look at this after a week from hearing this, and I immediately emailed all three of you within 30 seconds after I heard this news.
So my first thought was actually when I got your email was like, wow, not going to happen for another year. I'm like, that's disconcerting. And then my secondary thought was, did the powers that be bite off too much? Are we changing too much in Drupal that it's, it may be for the better, but is it going to hamper the fact that we can't manage to get a release out in a reasonable amount of time? And with the with kind of like the rebuild and integration of Symphony and that sort of thing.
John, what's a reasonable amount of time though? That sounds like you have some sort of date in your head.
I really
amount of time when it's done, right?
I really don't. I mean, but I do think that release cycles should be fairly quicker than when did Drupal 7 come out? Drupal 7 came out 2 years ago?
No, 2010. 2011? 2010 or 2011.
So we'll say 3 or 4 years ago, right? So for there not to be like another major release within 3 or 4 years seems kind of odd to me. I mean, just looking at other software packages and other CMS platforms, there's some sort of seems to be a quicker release schedule or major release schedule than what we're seeing here. So now we're looking at 3 or 4 years, right? That Drupal 7's been out. Drupal 7's rocking it. We're all using it. We're all loving it. But now we're looking at another possible year before we're going to see Drupal 8 release that we can actually start using. That's a little bit disconcerting to me. From where I'm sitting.
I have to say that it really does concern me too, not from the perspective that Drupal 8 will be done when it's ready, and I get that it's a huge undertaking to do what they're doing. I mean, they're changing massive amounts of the underpinnings of this thing. The issue that I have and the struggle that I have is that it has taken all the wind out of any momentum behind actually finishing so many Drupal 7 modules, and that's a huge concern because we have so many. Because this was something we've talked about.
What do you mean, Jason? I'm not clear what you mean by.
Because when everybody's thinking about Drupal 8, they're not bothering to get a Drupal 7 module out of dev or out of beta or alpha even. I mean, how many times have we talked about these modules that are sitting in this half-baked state?
You think that's because of Drupal 8?
I think, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Jason. I mean, if I'm a module developer and I've got a stable version of my Drupal 7 module, and there are a couple of issues that need, there are, say, 10, 12 issues in the issue queue that need to be addressed, and I'm thinking that Drupal 8 is coming out in, say, 6 months.
But John, if you're a Drupal 8, if you're a module developer, there's no way you could be thinking today that I'm just going to stop developing Drupal 7 because all of a sudden everyone's just going to pick up Drupal 8 immediately. I mean, Drupal 7 has hundreds of thousands of installs and is going to be there for a long time.
Yeah.
I would be shocked.
I'd
be shocked that would be the thought process from a Drupal 7 module.
Yeah, I think the bigger issue is the core development team. People have put more time in Drupal 8 than any other release before. And Drupal 6 came out in 2008, and Drupal 7 came out in 2011. So we're pretty much almost exactly the same amount of time between 7 and 8 as there was between 6 and 7 right now.
And we still have a year to go.
Yeah, and to hear that we have a year to go, I think the bigger risk is that it can be discouraging for some of the people that have been putting a lot of time in. I also think Drupal 8 is in a unique position to really start taking advantage of the way that the internet is going, especially with the REST APIs and with getting views in core. And it has a huge opportunity here to really snap up some market share and become like the enterprise go-to choice for CMSs and even certain levels of applications. Maybe the application itself isn't in Drupal, but Drupal is kind of the central hub. And the longer it takes for it to come out, the more likely it is that another CMS can snap that space up. And while it's not necessarily a bad thing to have more competition, the more people using Drupal, the more people there are to fix bugs or add features, the healthier the ecosystem. So, I mean, for me, it is a concern. I think it's more an issue of setting expectations. I mean, 6 months ago we were giving our predictions, and I think I said February. I think a couple of people said March. A couple of people said whatever the next DrupalCon is. So, I mean, it was definitely, we're definitely way off.
I still think it's going to be out by DrupalCon LA.
Yeah, that was your prediction, John.
Yeah, so we've got quite a ways to go, and I think fatigue and disinterest is really the big risk.
No, I agree. I mean, I think it affects both. I think it affects both ends of that spectrum we're talking about. I think it takes momentum out of like focusing on modules that need to be improved and kept stable or made stable in D7, and yeah, I mean, we've lost some really key contributors, to Drupal just because of burnout. There's been tons of discussion about that.
Another thing is, the longer it takes, the more of a chance Backdrop has with success. Although I've been following a bit where it is, but if it ends up being a year or two before Drupal 8 comes out and Backdrop gets a little bit of headway, then they can certainly be a bigger fork than people currently think. If Drupal 8 had come out by now,
I don't know about that. I mean, listen, I'm not going to start using Backdrop just because Drupal 8's not out. I'm going to keep using Drupal 7. It's not like a lot of people are going to start like dropping Drupal 7 because Drupal 8 hasn't come out. It's more of a, I think it's more of an effort problem and a module development problem than it is somebody running away from Drupal to get to go to another CMS. I don't think that's logical.
So I think there's a real fair question here to ask is, and I look at this from projects that I do, right, is that the customer might have a different expectation of when the project should be done as to what I have that expectation to be. And if I've never told a customer when it would be done, is it fair for the customer to make assumptions about what a valid release date is? My point being, I'm not aware of any time that Drupal as an organization has ever said this will be when this product will be launched. And where it's sounding like they've missed some, we're talking like they've missed some date that has never been announced.
True.
It's a date that we have kind of created in our head based on when we want to have it, not necessarily what the factors
Right.
are that are
Yeah.
demanding when that thing be done.
You know, the whole point behind going to a point release in Drupal 8 was for this very reason. And unfortunately, we can't get there because we're not there yet. And, you know, I mean, Dries has always said at every single DrupalCon, when asked the question, when will version X be out, when it's ready. And but at the same time, we all as a community have talked about and recognized that we need momentum and we need a shorter time span when it comes to getting new versions out. I mean, we still have so many workarounds to get something to be responsive and HTML5 compliant in Drupal 7. And that's the most recent version we have to work with. And, you know, I got a weird itch I had to scratch yesterday, and I made the Drupal PVD site responsive. So yesterday afternoon, I downloaded the database and I started working on my local system, and I had to add at least 10 modules to deal with all the various aspects of how to make it responsive, add in the base theme, add in the functions to remove heights and widths that Drupal keeps putting into images that get rendered out. I mean, all of these things. And that's just to get it up to what should be at least a passably acceptable standard in modern web development. And it still has way too much junky markup.
So let me ask you guys something. Jason just said, you know, that Dries, anytime asked when X release of Drupal would be out, his response is always, you know, when it's ready. Do you guys think that's kind of a cop-out? Do you think it's, you know, it's kind of sidestepping the issue of not having some sort of firm date or deadline to drive some of these initiatives? And what I mean by that is, like, don't get me wrong, I know the core team and everybody that's working on Drupal 8 is working very hard, and they want it to be out as quickly as possible. But to Steve's point, if I were to say to a client, or if you were to go get a service from somebody and you were to ask, oh, okay, well, you know, when's that going to be done? And they said, well, it's going to be done when it's done. You'd be like, well, what kind of answer is that? I mean, is it a cop-out? Is that part of the problem?
I'd say no, mostly because it's a volunteer, you know, workforce. It's a volunteer organization. I mean, as people have mentioned, most of the thoughts of it going too long really are our own artificial deadlines that we kind of had in mind. And I think they work pretty hard at being open about what they, you know, when they think things are coming out. And ultimately looking
Nick, there's a converse to that, though. There's a converse argument to that I'm just going to interrupt you on, is to say that when you say as a product that you want to be now an enterprise product that competes with enterprise products, you have a problem also now saying that, hey, we're not sure when we can actually deliver something.
Well, you know,
I think those two things are a little bit contradictory. Not that I think either one of them is wrong, but I think there's a little bit of a problem there.
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I think Drupal 8 is really the first one that's trying to be that enterprise, and having an extra year of development for all the stuff that we're changing is, I think, reasonable. And really, if it releases next January, it's only 6 months more in the alpha to full release than Drupal 7 was. And it's a much bigger code base. It's much more flexible, and I think we're setting ourselves up to that faster release cycle and the more sure release cycle in the future.
Nick, I don't like I agree with that outlook, but I think we have to be honest about whether or not that is simply a little bit naively optimistic. And I am the first one to admit, I have to be the first one to admit that I am a glass half full person, and sometimes more than sometimes to my detriment. And if we look at what happened when Drupal 7 came out, that was the assurance, was that it's not going to take this long next time.
Yeah.
And now it's going to take longer. Maybe it's only 6 months. Maybe it's a year. We don't really know.
Yep.
So is part of the problem that there are no dates that have ever been set, and so we're forced to guess at these things and think it's late when it might not be late?
The problem is two contradictory worlds that we're dealing with. And one is an entirely volunteer-driven effort to create the software in the first place. And on the other side of this, and so that you can only go with, I mean, yes, some companies pay employees to work on core, but that's not enough of the norm to really say that this is paid development overall. It's generally a volunteer effort. And so you have to accept that the timeline there is going to be longer. It just is, because you have to deal with the vagaries of people's schedules. And on the other side of that, if you say you want to be an enterprise piece of software, you have to be current. You have to respond to trends in software development in the marketplace. And we're currently spending a lot of time trying to make what we do current in the marketplace, despite a wonderfully flexible but showing its age a little bit piece of software in Drupal 7.
So let's move this discussion on to does this announcement from a week ago, unofficial, have, or maybe it was really not an announcement, more maybe a reality check is probably a way to phrase it better. Does this impact you guys and what you're doing in your businesses? Jason, you've sort of alluded to that a little bit here, but does it really impact you? And I say that in a little way of thinking about the people who have been working on training programs, offering services. I don't think it affects them, because I think the core of what Drupal 8 is in place. And we're probably, while there might not be a full release until, let's just call it February, so a year from now, there's no reason why a lot of stuff won't be ready long before that, and customers couldn't move to Drupal 8 if it was a necessity based on some of the key features of what Drupal 8 offers.
Well, I'm not about to stop working with Drupal, because it is still, for me, the best tool.
I didn't think that was the option we were talking about. So.
No, but you may nuclear option. But I will say, I certainly do, and I have to, because the biggest part of what I do and what we focus on is strategy and design, and if we want to deliver the best possible end result for the user and the site owner, a lot of that has to do with responsive design, performance, and user experience.
Well, from your business perspective, Jason, you maybe should be in a business where you're technology agnostic a little bit.
Well, and in some ways we are. A lot of the work that we do is technology agnostic, and we can do everything up to responsive templates and hand that off, and we have done that. And we've done that on several projects, but I want a tool that we can use to do things end to end. And while I have a good setup for Drupal 7, it does increasingly require more and more effort to make it really do what I want it to do, and I'm have to be accepting of a lot of compromises.
So we'll save the question of what other tools would you consider. We'll save that for another show. But is this announcement making you, John or Nick, is this impacting your business in any way?
I would say not really. I mean, our development team is looking at Drupal 8 and doing its best to work with it in its beta form. But the standard is still for us to build sites in Drupal 7, and that's that's just where we are. That's where we're going to be, apparently, for the foreseeable future. So unless a client comes to us with a specific need for Drupal 8, we're not going to be we're not going to be going down that road, other than in a kind of a research and development capacity for now.
So I think there are some key things in Drupal 8 that would make someone consider it as a reasonable solution for a current project. Translation seems to be one of those things, that the translation capabilities in Drupal 8 are far superior to anything prior. This headless client that Nick was talking about earlier seems to be an area where if you're building a new site that technology and that strategy is a focus, then even the beta product would be a serious consideration at this point.
Yeah, and while we're a year from full release, we're not a year from beta, we're not a year from release candidates. And and for me, changes it makes in my business, nothing directly, but one thing, I guess one positive that comes out of it being so far away, I suppose, is it feels like I feel like I have time to contribute, whereas, and that's not something I've done. I've contributed to modules. I've written my own modules. I've hacked code, but I've never contributed to core. And I'm finally in a position where I feel comfortable enough actually looking at the issue queue and putting something together. And where there's a year left, it feels like there's enough time to get to know one of the big pieces and possibly provide something valuable. If they told me it was coming out in 2 months, then I would feel like a fair amount of the time might be wasted. There's people already up to speed that will be able to do that kind of information. So,
Nick, your comments right there lead to the great response from people who are trying to get Drupal 8 out there is, if you're going to sit there and be concerned and complain about it not coming out,
right,
you can get involved, right? That is really,
absolutely.
There's really no answer to that other than saying, okay, I'll get involved, because it's really true. So there are some options to do that, which sort of takes us to our next section here, which is, there's two things I want to address. One is, what should people do who are they're interested in Drupal 8? It is coming. Is it going to be here in June? No, it's probably not September. But frankly, that's not that many weeks away and months away from us. So what do we recommend as ways for people to get involved and start to get knowledgeable about Drupal 8? And this announcement should not deter anyone from thinking they need to wait longer, because I think Drupal 8 is strong enough and solid enough that it's really the perfect time to be involved. So what are the ways to do that? One of them is to just get involved in the development of it. And that always sounds like a crazy, scary thing, right?
Well, and there's a lot of people to help. That's, you have to embrace that.
And one way to do that is this upcoming weekend, and people will probably hear this after this, but it's not too late, is there's a global sprint going on this weekend. It's 2 days, the 17th and 18th. I think I get those dates right.
Yep.
So if someone could do a quick Google search on global sprint for Drupal, I don't know what the URL is, but there are communities all around the globe that are trying to spend this 2 days to do a global sprint, which is not just people doing code, but people. I almost feel like it's almost more about a campaign to help people start to get involved, is what this sprint is about. Because like the one that's going to be hosted here locally in Boston is on Saturday at Genuine Interactive. And if you've never contributed at all to Drupal, it's you can imagine that it's very hard to do something in 1 day. But you know what? That 1 day is a great way to get started in something.
Yeah.
It could be anything from documentation to testing to doing some core code development if you want to. But this opportunity does exist.
Well, I think that was, the biggest thing that I see people get out of sprint days at DrupalCon is just getting set up and learning where where to go to find the things that are in your lane. That was, we saw I saw it in Austin, I saw it in Sydney, other Drupal cons I've gone to. Even if you just spend that day there, get your environment set up, get familiar with what issues or how to find the issues that you're comfortable with. And they're all, from help documentation to markup and CSS and HTML to more in-depth stuff, Twig template conversions, base theme work. I mean, there's loads of ways for people to get involved, even if they have no coding experience whatsoever.
There's a great resource online at ownsourcing.com, which is things you need to have prepared to participate in a sprint. They give you lots of information there and links that you could go to setting up your environment before you walk in, some tools that will be helpful for you. So that day on a sprint doesn't have to be just you getting yourself set up. There are resources to help you there ahead of time. So beyond the sprint this weekend, by the way, is anyone participating?
We will be dropping Trevor off at college on Saturday.
No, I'm not looking for excuses. I'm just
I'm just letting you know.
So I'm going to say that I can't participate either. I'm wondering if there's some way I could do a half a day, maybe even virtually. So I'm gonna peek into that a little bit because I would like to help out in some way if I could.
Well, I think that a ton of it is done remotely by lots of people. So.
Yeah, and I think there are some virtual seats for the Boston one here that they've made available. So I'm going to try to figure out if I can do that. I just hate to take a seat if I can only do it for 5 hours instead of 10. So, but we'll see. What else? So beyond a sprint, if someone's looking to just get started in Drupal 8, and we've probably talked about this in the past, but even though it's a year away, it's still the time to start to learn some stuff. And the more I'm learning, the more I know that I don't know. There's so much interesting things going on with Drupal 8 in terms of positioning itself as a really competitive product, like Nick was mentioning earlier, in terms of just some of the headless stuff and being integrated using Composer into other PHP libraries, that it really is a great place to be right now in Drupal, and which is why, to me, another 12 months doesn't matter. I mean, if it's 12 months or 14 months, I really think we're sort of in the game changer mode for the product. This thing is either going to really be great in 2 years from now, or it will be a huge failure, probably. I'm not expecting the failure side, but I think we're positioned properly as Drupal people. So what other things would you guys recommend for just getting your feet wet and getting in the mode here?
ExploringDrupal8.com.
yeah, exploringDrupal8.com is really an attempt by me to just sort of create an opportunity for people to talk on a weekly basis. We've been doing it for probably 7 or 8 weeks now. Skipped a few weeks over the holidays, and it's just there's 7 or 8 people get on the phone and talk about a topic in Drupal 8. That's one way to do it. It's a great way. I've already learned a ton. We get some great people involved there.
Yeah.
Anyone's welcome to join in. There's no limitations. Just hop on the phone call and get involved, or you could listen later. What other ways are there?
Apparently, taking you out to dinner is a great way to learn about Drupal 8 because you know so much now.
Okay, so John, when are you taking me out for dinner?
We'll see. We'll see when my schedule clears up.
Okay, all right.
I got a whole year before I need to actually do it. So.
Yeah. Well,
I imagine it's like hot wieners, and I'm sure most people on this phone call don't even know what that is. But John's probably taking me out for hot wieners.
Hey, Haven Brothers, oldest food truck in the country.
That's true.
Well, I think just starting with that Drupal 8 release page on Drupal.org, there's a ton of good resources there to figure out how you can get involved. I think that's, if you can't make it to one of these sprint days or talk to anybody who's involved, then I think that's the best way to get started.
So another way I'd recommend is install it.
Oh well, yeah, there's that too.
Yeah, so that's another way to do it. Install it or use like Simply Me.
Oh, simple test me.
Simple Test Me.
Simply test me.
Simply,
that was close. Let's just say 46
simplytest.me.
other ways.
Yeah. But just install it and start to mess around with it. Great way to at least get started.
So one of the issues there, not to dissuade anybody, because I firmly believe in just installing it and playing around with it. My understanding was that the beta was supposed to be upgradable, or there was supposed to be some sort of upgrade path, and apparently,
upgrade path from what?
Just from version to version. One beta to the next. And apparently that's not exactly the case. I guess one of the last betas, what are we on, 4 now?
It's on 4, yeah.
So I guess from 3 to 4, some major things changed, and it's not like you can just run a drush up to update it.
Yeah, they were and they were not very clear about that. Typically, beta means that there's upgrade paths, but there's a couple of key API components just still working out, so that's going to be the case for a bit. Yeah, there's not going to be an upgrade path for a little while yet.
Which is why I'm always concerned about people who say, and a lot of people have said it, hey man, just create a production site, just go production with this. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like production for my personal blog, maybe.
It'd be interesting to talk to I'm failing on their name.
Last Call Media.
Yes.
Yeah, those guys. It'd be interesting to talk to those guys and see how their production company website is either benefiting or not.
My guess is it's running still on the same version that it went into production with. But that's a total guess.
Well, I mean, you can create feeds out of views. So, I mean, it is possible to, create streams of content from one version to the next.
I'm putting it out there. If anybody from Last Call Media is listening, reach out to one of us. We'd like to talk to you.
Last Call's not the only one, too. There's been a number of companies that have promoted Drupal 8 production websites.
Yeah. Well, Last Call did a really beautiful job, and they're right here in New England, though, so we'd love to give them the support.
Yeah, and they did it like a year, feels like a year and a half ago. I mean,
it was a while. It was a while.
They
I think they were talking about it at D4D last summer. So.
Yeah, it's been up for at least a year.
That's where I heard and learned about their project. Very interesting.
All right, so we're gonna move beyond our Drupal 8 talk unless anyone wants to add anything in here at the end for 30 seconds. No takers. Okay.
Except I think it's going to be out at DrupalCon LA.
Still, you're sticking with that, John, huh? I wouldn't drop any cash in Vegas on that, by the way. The over/under on that. The over/under on that June date.
I'd actually like to see if people are actually betting on that in Vegas. I know you can bet on anything in Vegas, but that seems like the one thing you would not be able to bet on.
Somebody's doing it.
So we had a listener reach out to us, as we had requested, to say, hey, got any questions, reach out to us. And he did. Dan... And let me just make sure I've got his name right. And it's not in my notes, but I do believe it's Dan. And Dan, if it's not Dan, I apologize. But that's really not the point here. So the point is that our listener here is relatively new to Drupal, has built a number of what we'd call simple websites, and is now launching into his first website that does something. And that something is, I'm going to describe it here, and the point of this discussion is to give some recommendations on how we would approach this project. So I'm going to describe it to you. So this is a website that high schools, I believe it's in the UK, you would use to track and approve volunteer hours in the physical education field. So what happens is volunteers that are working to get some certification in physical education need to do volunteer hours. And they do volunteer hours across multiple schools in a district or in a region.
Mhm.
And the purpose of this website is for the volunteers to post their hours that they've worked volunteering for a sporting event, and then a mentor who has been assigned to them to approve that those hours were actually done. That's the essence of what this website is about. So there's a number of things that jump out initially is like things like security, roles, who has the ability to see what data and update what data. And that really is the essence of this website. So let's chat about. You guys see that we created internally. We have this sort of outline document, which would be maybe a functional spec for a website.
Yeah, close to one.
And probably better than some of the functional specs we get for things that we build. So let's talk a little bit about how you guys would approach this.
Well, I mean, all in all, it's a fairly straightforward site. I mean, you have a couple different roles. We basically have one piece of content, or one content type, and you have some interaction with that. I think there's only one piece of the functionality that's a bit complicated, but one issue that I think, just looking at this site, one of the first issues that comes up is you have about 130 people logging into the website. You want to pay some attention to instructions on how to use the site, especially since it's all volunteers, and ways of offloading the training.
Right.
Especially for things like password resets, how to add hours, since you're not allowing editing hours after they've been approved, a clear explanation, both in text and with the UI on why that's the case. Those are my initial impressions. I don't know about.
Yeah. Well, so let's go back and kind of review a little bit of a detail of what you were describing. Basically, we've got, in terms of Drupal entities, there's users, and there's users in one of three roles, likely: a volunteer, a mentor, and an administrator. And there's, basically, we're looking at one important content type, and that is an hour entry. And that hour entry has a date and time, and it needs to be owned by, at least initially, the person who created it. So the volunteer creates this entry, and then they need to be able to tag it to the mentor. Hopefully, if they have a mentor that's already sort of pre-filtered, if it's one who's assigned to them. They put in a number for the hours, a description of the activity. Location, that might be another content type, or a taxonomy, perhaps, to make it simpler. So from a UI perspective, for the volunteer, you cut down on the number of things they have to do and get more consistent data. I think it'd be important to be able to do the reporting later to see how many hours were done at this school versus that one, and by whom. And then, whether or not it's been approved. And so we talked about a couple different ways that the workflow of that could be controlled, because the stuff that we're describing is relatively straightforward. We're doing entity references and not much more in terms of creating it. We probably want to use some data typed fields, like some sort of number field that they can only type numbers in, so that the hours is a little bit simpler. You could try alternate forms of input there and masking to make it a little bit simpler for them.
How do you format the hours? What data? Numeric type?
You can add, when you add a field, you could add a decimal field instead of just making it a text field.
Yeah.
So an hour is really 1.5 hours, not 1 hour and 30 minutes or 45 minutes.
Right. I would definitely give people like the decimal option.
Mm-hmm.
Or limit it to like increments or something.
Well,
Although,
sorry, I was
sorry,
going to say that brings up a good point, because that'd actually be one of my questions is, do you want just the raw data, just the amount of hours that they worked, or do you want to know the time as well?
well, okay, so I'm making an assumption,
Yep.
but the likelihood is they don't really need to care that it was from 2 to 3 p.m. They just need to know the date, it was Friday, and it was an hour. Because I think it's cumulative hours that they need to track. So if
as
that's the case,
as the PM on this project, I think that's accurate. I mean, our spec here says date and time, but I think we're really looking at
right,
what the date was and how much time someone spent.
right.
So back to the location a little bit. Just talking to Dan, quote unquote,
Alleged Dan.
the alleged Dan. I'm not sure that location is quite as important as the mentor is the key piece. Connecting to the particular person that is approving their hours. And while we could potentially have drop downs of location and stuff, I'm not sure that that's really where they would be initially here. It's not about what school they were at. It's solely about someone putting in their 100 hours.
I would say if there has to be any kind of auditing of the accuracy of the information, I think the likelihood is that they would benefit from knowing the location. But I'm a little bit more of a data pack rat. That's So I think if you can make it easy, then like a drop down, as long as there aren't too many locations, then.
So that's the thing that sort of struck in my mind is that it means more administrative tasks potentially and more user confusion. Let's say I'm making this up, but let's say there's 500 locations, but this particular person, only going to 2 schools to see a drop down of 500 locations is absurd.
Well, that's where like Drupal's autocomplete might be the way to go about it.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely consider a autocomplete taxonomy before just a plain old select list.
Well, you can do rather than use a taxonomy, you can do autocomplete with any entity.
And I also think as developers we need to be careful about not creating functionality and requirements that don't exist.
Right. No, absolutely. Because ultimately, the other thing I was going to put out there, in terms of making this easy for people, things like the Simplify module do a good job of hiding some things. So, I mean, you want to make the data entry on this as drop-dead simple as possible.
So talk a little bit about the Simplify module, since you mentioned it.
What allows you to safely hide some fields in the content entry and edit view so that people who don't have full admin privileges get a simpler form. And sometimes it can even get it to the point where you don't even have any vertical tabs at the bottom. It's just the fields you want them to fill out, and then boom. And that's really what you want to get to, so that this is one of those instances where absolutely in the moment you want them to be able to log it as they walk out the door. So you want a super simple mobile-ready view, a responsive view of this thing, so that they can pull it up on their phone, log their hours, and go about their day.
So one of the issues here that you really touched on, Jason, that I had in my notes here was how does the admin side, because when people start to enter stuff in, they can enter it in like through a web form, which is not the case here, right? Which we know is usually drop dead simple for a user. But once you make someone that gets access to the Drupal edit forms, those things get slightly a bit more complicated with the tabs and stuff. So the Simplify would take care of that for everybody.
Yeah, and there's no, that's definitely the case. Probably the next most complicated piece is the auditing piece, the allowing users to edit the hours up until they've been approved by the mentor. And there's a couple ways that you can approach this. I know that.
So Nick, before you get to that, what about the mentor only the person that can approve someone's hours? And I stepped out for a minute, so I don't know if we talked about that.
No.
Okay,
No.
so if you go through the work, so let's approach this problem through the workflow. So initially someone is getting entered as a volunteer into the system, and they're being assigned to a mentor.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any comments there?
Well, it's some kind of entity reference.
Yep.
And so I would tend to look at that as a multi-select that you do on the mentor side, connecting them to multiple other mentees. And so in a view, you can look at that from either direction.
Right.
And so that way for the mentee, if they have been assigned a singular mentor, then they wouldn't have to do anything. It would already be pre-populated, and they just, that's one less piece of data that they have to enter.
Right, because from the mentee side, do I have the terminology right? It doesn't matter who their mentor is. They just know someone who needs to approve their hours.
Right.
And they need that drop-down list potentially of, I guess when they enter their hours, who their mentor is. But
right, and
that should be a limited list already.
Yeah,
right.
and you can make a view that shows only people that they're assigned to. So
right.
if somebody
and
has
if
more
they're
than one
only
mentor.
assigned to one, then it's already done. Like there's nothing else for them to do.
Exactly.
Okay, so to continue the workflow, so the volunteer gets set up, assigned to a mentor. The volunteer logs into the system and adds some hours.
Yep.
Okay, I think we're clear about what that would be like.
Yep.
Then a mentor logs in and sees a screen that says, hey, here are all the volunteers that have entered hours that you have not approved yet. So let's just talk about that before we get into non-editing stuff.
So I would probably approach this with use bulk operations in the flag module and allow hours to be flagged as either approved or not. So then when the mentor is on the page that shows all the people that have not been approved, they can just check a box on all the ones that they want to approve and then choose the action to approve these hours, and it will approve all dozen of them at once or each of them at once.
So the flag module is the approval thing for you?
Yes.
Yeah. And what does that actually mean? So someone doesn't know what the flag module is.
The flag module, it's a bit strange.
It's very confusing to explain.
It's really just it's kind of like a background checkbox that basically says, I've done this thing.
So you wouldn't handle this through taxonomy? There's no way to address this through a taxonomy?
Well,
no, I wouldn't. I mean, there is, but
yeah, but Nick, you could also do it simply with a CCK checkbox field on the content type and use field permissions.
Pause for a second, because this is the second time that Nick said no to taxonomy. And
I hate using taxonomy.
I can tell you right now, from an admin standpoint, when you need to pull reports on this information, it's going to be a lot easier to pull reports based on taxonomy, content tagged with certain taxonomies, than it is with content that's using either an autocomplete or just a select.
It would be just as easy if it's a CCK field, like basically a checkbox field.
Reporting is the same for all three, pretty much.
I would. So, Nick, the other, we also thought of some kind of workbench moderation way of handling this, but a CCK checkbox and field permissions so that the volunteer can't see or impact the approval field, but only moderators and admins can. That would be a way to the build of it fairly simple. I like taxonomy when you need to give the client the ability to change the contents of the list. But we don't need to do that here.
Right.
One reason why I would lean towards flag than over CCK is flag gives you the ability to have a view that shows all things and have a button that says approve.
Right. Like a bulk update, like a bulk.
Yeah. But it doesn't have to be a bulk. It can just be on an individual basis. So you see you see each one has a button next
Yep.
to it called approve, and you can just click approve, and it will
Yeah. No,
change it.
that's true. We use that
Right.
for subscribing to
Yeah.
notifications in one.
Yeah, exactly. And then
That's a
what
nice
the-
Ajaxy UI.
yeah, and that's why I lean towards it,
Good
because
point.
sometimes you'll want to just go through and click each one. Sometimes you'll want to just check a bunch off and use bulk operations, but not requiring somebody to use bulk operations every single time is probably a nice feature. And then on the depending on the skill level of the person building the site, but on the volunteer side of things, what you can have is just basically on their dashboard you can have two lists, ones that have not been flagged, and it shows the date and the hours that they spent, and it's linked to the edit form. And then if it's been flagged, it just shows up in a different list of approved hours, and they're no longer linked. And then
the point being that you can build different views.
Yeah,
one that has
exactly.
an edit, one that doesn't, based on the flag.
Exactly.
Yeah. Right. So and the premise here is that you want to allow the volunteer to edit something that hasn't been approved yet. So if they entered something and realized, well, it was 2 hours, it wasn't, or it was Thursday, not Friday, they can still go back and make that change.
Yeah.
That's
and one thing, it's a bit security by obscurity. One thing with the flag module and doing it this way is the person actually would be able to edit the other hours still.
If they knew the URL?
Yeah, if they know the URL. There's nothing actually preventing them.
Yeah.
What you can do as well is change the author once.
Yeah, you could use rules to, once the mentor approves the node, you could have rules change that node to their user ID.
Yeah.
So that way.
The problem is the association with the person that put the hours in. You'd need a separate field to record that as well.
Yeah, but that might not be such a bad idea, because by changing the author, you can rely on Drupal's built-in permissions you can create and edit your own, but not all. So as soon as the owner is changed, all you have to do is create a CCK field that logs the original author's ID and just don't change it. So that way you could still link it back to their view of things that have been approved.
You could also just use revisions and keep track of it that way. That way you could see who originally created it and then who the mentor was that approved it.
I mean, that starts to get messier with views, though, with revisions.
Yeah, one, it's also it's of lesser value from sort of like an information reliability standpoint. So, I think what we are approaching this as like, would this be a provably accurate system? And sometimes when you're building the first pass at it, maybe you don't have to be as thorough. So changing the author, using revisions, there's a few things that you could do that are less complex, but less bulletproof. But if you need to get something that is like used for certification, then you want it to be more provably accurate, so you need to have a little bit more security around the accuracy and validity of that information once it's been approved by a mentor.
Yeah, and something else that you can do, it's fairly straightforward to set up an extra field on the content type that records the person, records the author, and just make that field hidden with field permissions, and then you don't have to deal with it at the time of switching. So you'd end up with date, mentor, volunteer, number of hours, description of activity, and location, and
if they care about location.
If they care about location, and the volunteer field would just be hidden and pre-filled, and then when somebody fills that out, it shows up on the list for the volunteer, and they can edit it if they need to. It shows up on the mentor's list, and they can approve it.
Right.
Once it's approved, it shows up. The flag switches it to a list that is uneditable, editable, and then switches the author so that they can no longer edit it either, even if they know the URL.
Yeah, and the other thing that we've sort of like glossed over that John brought up is the rules module is a big important component of this, because we can use that. We can use the rules module to do things like change the author of a node on save if a given criteria is met, meaning that it's been approved. And then we can also use the rules module to notify the mentor when hours have been submitted for approval. So that way,
which is the other thing here, which is the automation piece, right?
Right.
And just to say, when you're getting ready to look at rules, have a bottle of whiskey close by.
Oh, come on. I don't agree with that.
But Steve, I think you do have to admit it takes a little time and persistence to work your way through and get really familiar with what will cause certain things to work or become apparent.
Yeah.
It just
the rules UI will take a little bit more getting used to than the other.
I will say the rules that we've talked about, setting up the rules that we've talked about are fairly easy.
Right. Yeah, they're relatively.
Yeah, they're elementary. Right.
There
they're straightforward.
are more complex rules out there that will require whiskey or time to understand.
The whiskey rules.
The whiskey rules. Yeah. So,
all right. I think we've given, and it is Dan, by the way.
Yes. Dan Thompson.
Yes, Dan, thank you so much for submitting this. And as I told you, we would talk about it today.
If we know his name now, can we make up a location? Can we say he's from Poughkeepsie?
You can.
Thank you, Dan from Poughkeepsie.
It never stopped us from making up stuff before. So
True.
Okay.
True. We've been doing it for over a year now.
So Dan, as I promised you, after you listen to this episode, I'm more than happy to get on the phone with you and spend a little time reviewing any of the follow-up questions you have. So.
Or if you never want to talk to us again, we understand that too.
If we've sent you in the wrong direction and you've crashed and burned, we apologize. But
hopefully you'll at least have some good whiskey.
Yeah, and I have to say, it looks like he's got some experience with Drupal, but he's fairly new. This project is fairly straightforward, but it's got a couple pieces that are a bit more complex. But I think it's at a good level for somebody that's kind of just jumping in. It's not like it doesn't seem like you're biting off something that's a huge 6, 8, 10-month project with a huge team of people. It's a fairly straightforward project. So
I think that's a great point. This project is a great next step. It really is for someone who hasn't done a whole lot in Drupal. This is really a good next step project. All right, so thank you, Dan, and anyone else in the future. You got something like this. I'm not sure whether you could design an entire corporate website for a Fortune 500 company on a phone call. It may take a number of phone calls, but just send your questions in, and we'd be happy to chat about them a bit. So let's move on to.
Thanks.
Let's move on to the module of the week, and that module is one I submitted: paragraphs. So I've only recently learned about paragraphs, and like most of the modules of the week, we hear about them and then promote them. So this is a module that's really interesting in that it's a lot like field collections. So paragraphs allows you to define what a paragraph is that you would include in a content type. So a paragraph is an entity that has fields. So I think the best way to describe this is to give you an example. Let's say that I want my users basic pages on a website that could be different structures within the content of the page. So they may have one section of the page that has an image on the left and text on the right. They may have another section that's an image on the top and text at the bottom. They may have another section that's just text. They may have another section that's just an image. I would call each one of these a paragraph definition.
And I think it's important to talk about the fact that this is kind of like a replacement for a body text field. So it's not about necessarily, in most cases anyway, what is framing around the content, like the navigation and things like that. But in thinking about an article, a story, a product sheet, something like that, is I think generally the intent.
I think a real differentiator between paragraphs and field collections is on the host entity, the paragraph is a placeholder entity, and you get to choose which instance you're using. So you can say, first I want an image with text, and then I want just text, and then I want an image with text on the right, and then I want this. And it's actually kind of interesting because I think it's actually a solution to a problem I have in a project right now where it's a pretty media heavy site. Occasionally they need a native image gallery, occasionally they need Flickr, occasionally they need a video gallery. They never need all three at once. And this, instead of having just all three options all the time, there's just a paragraph option, and then they choose which image gallery they need based on that.
Well, I got a question. Why would I use this module as opposed to something that I've done in the past, creating an input for an image field for slideshows, and then giving them a body area where they can select images, add paragraphs, and then just select images, float them left, float them right, whatever they need to do. What's the upside to doing it this way as opposed to building out your content type with the pieces that they may need, making them optional, and then going that way?
Cleaner markup.
Maybe.
I don't know about that.
But I think since we started talking about it, I think it's because you can add other stuff really easily. You can add video really easily. You can do that with other modules, but this would make it a little bit cleaner. And it could be any other kind of field. What if you wanted to include, inline a gallery as opposed to a single image, as opposed to a video, or inline you want a data table of some kind of stuff from another area of the website. So it allows you to have more and more kinds of paragraphs with these asides or media enclosures of some sort.
So one of the things I think we just jumped in before we finished the explanation of what this does, so people understand, is that once you create a paragraph bundle type, in a content type, you can add that as a field and then make it a multi-field. So it's a key thing here that in one content type, you can allow a user to say, I want to use a image and text left, right. I just want to use the image. I just want to use the text, and all of those can be added as multi-field within the same body of the content.
I have a question.
Is it one field?
Well, so when you add the field, so initially when you install the module, you get a new content type called paragraph bundle. I think it's what it's called.
Entity.
What's that?
It's a new entity type.
A new entity, sorry. A new entity called paragraph bundle. And then you go create a paragraph bundle. You can name it and add any number of fields you want to it. And you could create 10 of those. So then on another content type, let's say a basic page, you add the field called paragraph bundle. And then the user then has the ability, when they go in to add new content, they pick which ones are the ones that you've predefined to be inserted in that block of content.
Can you restrict that list based on content type?
I spent about 30 minutes on this, so okay. I don't know all of the nuances of it.
I'm still wondering, like, when you get to views, is it considered one field that you then have to pick like a display for?
So I would imagine it's like, actually I'm sure it is because it's an entity. It's like field collection. So you can either show the rendered entity or
a specific element.
Or you can use a relationship and pull the fields individually. So you can do either or.
Right.
Okay. That sounds scary to me.
It's exactly like
scary good or scary bad, John?
Scary. I'm reserving judgment. I need you to talk about it more tonight so I can understand what the benefit to doing this is.
It's an entity reference.
Dinner? Is that what you're saying? We're going out for dinner tonight?
Don't no, don't.
Just
Let's not go down,
just the meetup, Steve. Just the
Oh,
meetup.
okay, all right,
let's not go down that path again.
right. So I haven't used this in a production site. I learned about it 7 days ago. So, but it really looks like an intriguing module, and I wanted to point it out for people to take a look at. I played around with it a little bit. I love what it does. I just don't know what it doesn't do yet.
Well, I think
Feels
that's
dangerous.
well. I've always gone the route of using an image field and the insert module to easily allow people to dump images that are tied to presets into body copy. And I've written some patches to that in the image caption module to get it kind of to behave and do the markup that I want. But that's limited, and I can't handle video the same way, and I can't insert a gallery like that. And I mean,
And
so
you can't control what someone does at the keyboard that way either.
right, that's true.
Yeah.
So
But you need to control it that much.
well, but John, I think that it again, this is coming back to ease of use for the content administrator. And if it's easier for them and more predictable for them to say, I want a paragraph with an image to the right, and then I want a paragraph with an image to the left, that's easy. Where I think it gives you nicely sort of structured content that's easy to get to display the way you want. I think where it could be a real challenge is if you're working on a publication site and they're adding stories that are being developed in other platforms and they have a 9,000-word story that's going in, or even a 1,000-word story that's going in, that's in a whole bunch of paragraphs, that's a really cumbersome workflow rather than copy.
So I think it's unfortunate that it's called paragraph, because it's not. Yeah, I mean, you're still able to paste more than one paragraph into the text
Right,
field.
but Nick, it completely then does an end run around being able to add in image. So I bring it up because we worked on building out a site for Virginia Quarterly Review last year with another agency, and so they had 10,000 articles that needed to be flowed into this. There's no way we could have used that module. It would be completely impossible because not only do we have all those articles to import, which had to be done programmatically, but we also had to preserve the embedding of the images and attach them to each of those nodes so that they wouldn't lose the references to them and still be tied into image presets and all that. So, I mean, it needed to be something that could be handled in a fairly similar way, and I don't think it would have been possible to do that, nor would it be possible for their editor to put in 20 articles every month, for the next issue, and paste them in from wherever they were being created. I mean, it's just it would be a really challenging workflow in that instance.
All right, guys. JJ has just told us that it's time to make a close here.
He's had enough of this workflow conversation. All this claptrap.
Okay, guys. Hey, thanks. I think paragraph is something interesting to look at.
Yeah.
We'll be peeking at it a little bit more, and John has asked me to talk about it tonight at Drupal PVD, so I'll spend a few more minutes on it today, and hopefully I can answer some of his additional questions. So, Jason, thank you for continuing again in 2015 with Talking Drupal.
My pleasure.
And I think you have something you want to talk about that's coming up at the end of the month.
Actually, unfortunately, I have to talk about the fact that we are going to have to postpone.
Sorry I brought that up.
No, it's okay. It's a real bummer. I had scheduled a responsive typography workshop in Boston, and it was my fault. We had plenty of lead time, but we had the holidays right in the middle, and plus the end of a lot of people's fiscal year for training budgets. And I think it was just the wrong time to try and schedule a workshop and get people to commit to it. So we only sold a small handful of tickets. We're going to try and reschedule it for sometime in March. But it'll still be in Boston. I'll still be doing more of them this year. And I've had some really fantastic other workshop things line up in Toronto and Las Vegas, and conference talks also out in Texas and Chicago coming up in the spring. So I'm pretty excited. Some good events shaping up.
Man, Jason must have been a pleasure to break up with in college. He pretty much just said, "It's not you, it's me."
Yeah, it's okay. So, Jason, anything, anything else you want to tell us that's been canceled in 2015?
No.
Good.
It's
Everything else is still good.
Yeah, everything else is still good. I'll have to tweet out the links again. I had a couple articles come out on the print and how design websites over the break since we last talked, and I've got another one I think that's going to be published soon on the Next Web. So I'm pretty excited about that.
Great, thank you. Glad to have us back online. And how about you, John?
You can find me tonight at Drupal PVD in Providence, the local Drupal meetup. And you can find me always on the interwebs at John Picozzi on most of the social networks and umthink.com.
Awesome. We hope that JJ feels better. So
yes, we're in the middle of a mega meltdown right now.
That's okay. I understand that. How about you, Nick?
Looking forward to Drupal PVD tonight. I think I'll be able to make it down. Might be a little late, but it'll be good to get back in the Drupal community. So missed it while I was down in Columbia.
Great.
And you can find me at Nixman on pretty much every social media site out there.
Awesome. So I'm Stephen Cross at stephencross.com. Also, parallaxinfotech.com is my company. You can find me there. I certainly will be at Drupal PVD tonight, enjoying the company and the company of the guys on this phone call and everyone else in the Providence area. It's turned out to be a great time in Providence, so check it out if you haven't been there recently. So, hey guys, welcome back. Thanks for coming, and we already have our topic for next week, so talk to you in 7 days.
See ya.
Bye.
Sure.